Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you.
You remember that one time in the first
Try
Ninja Turtle
it again.
movie?
Try it again. All right, start. All right, try it again.
You remember that one time in the first Ninja Turtles movie where Splinter says all fathers care about their sons?
Yes.
Yeah. You can hardly find that kind of line in today's movies, huh?
That's true.
The fathers are the bad guys these days.
Splinter was the final father depicted in a positive light in American cinema.
Yeah, that's true. That was just at the turn of the decade, just the beginning of the 90s. And it was such a weird time, right? Like the 80s were ending and the 90s were starting, and you have this.
Splinter was the final positive father figure depicted in Hollywood. And 33 years later, the rat still looms large over the American cultural landscape, right?
Yeah, is this the year of the rat or something?
Like you said, that scene has stuck with you when he said all fathers care about their sons.
Yeah, that was one of the most emotional scenes in the entire movie, right?
Yeah.
Like the bad guys were basically Antifa. These Foot Clan members who were made up of orphans and
so the Antifa, it's actually an insult. The Antifa is a wannabe Foot Clan because Foot Clan people, well, I had to put that, a lot of the people in the Foot Clan in the Ninja Turtle movie in 1990 were disaffected, poor kids who were looking for family figures. Antifa kids tend to be rich kids. Now, that one figure in the Ninja Turtle movie, Danny, who is the son of a wealthy man on Wall Street, that represents actually a lot of the Antifa figures of today. Danny, we should call the Antifa people Danny. Every one of those guys is a Danny under there because they're all usually billionaires' children who are trying to violently beat elderly people for wanting NAFTA to be repealed. It's just pretty ridiculous. Can you imagine how dumb you have to be? I mean, but Danny proves it in the Ninja Turtle movie. He's pretty dumb. And, he burns down April O'Neil's inherited business shop from her father, and he does so like what Antifa rich brats do today. They burn down entire city blocks and thinking they're sticking it to the man when all they're doing is impoverishing people and destroying people's families.
Yeah, they're miserable and they want other people to share in their resentment and their misery, right? So the Foot Clan, they're made up of these angsty teenagers who, have their father figures, they they're not meeting the needs of their father figure or whatever, like from their point of view. And Danny is that character. He says, Splinter asks him, where is your, like, why don't you have something like this? Like, why, who, is there anybody who is, or don't you have any family to go to?
Yeah.
Right? That he asks him that. And what about your father? And Danny says, my father doesn't give a crap about me. And right there, Splinter says, that can't be true because all fathers care about their sons.
Yeah.
And that's like a turning moment for that character in that movie, right? Because he jumped ship from Antifa, Foot Clan member, being a Foot Clan member to running away. And that's like the paradox,
Every
not the
Antifa,
paradox, right?
every Antifa kid is a kid who never met a Splinter to tell them that their daddy cares about him. After all, that's the problem.
Yeah, because they don't have somebody like Splinter. They have the nanny state, right? They have Shredder. So the nanny state is like Shredder, right? In a lot of ways.
And it's amazing. You can see the contrast of different Americas. The pizza that the Ninja Turtles must have fed on was probably pre-seed oils, because they wouldn't have been able to have the health fitness displayed in that film with the voluminous amount of pizza they were consuming if that was all seed oil, soybean oil, mental retardation causing seed oil. Although they are mutants, so God knows what that's involved with. But just from a stylistic standpoint, a thematic standpoint, you have, and I saw a review on YouTube was talking about how, that movie Ninja Turtles 1990 is about families and what does it mean to have a family. And I think it's interesting. The new Ninja Turtle movie has a similar theme on that, actually, but the one that just came out by Seth Rogen. But what's interesting about that movie, the original, is that it's like a tale of two families. One is a family by violence and by force, which is the family of myth,
Foot Clan,
and the family of myth, and then the other family is a family of love and acceptance and discipline and guidance and sharing one another's burdens, and having unity within diversity, because everybody's diverse. The Foot Clan, they're all the same basically. They're anonymous, undifferentiated mob. Right. When they put their mask on, they're all the same. And the Ninja Turtles, they make sure their mask distinguishes themselves, right, as differentiated, right? Which is the Trinitarian framework of unity, which is unity within diversity, right? Unity within distinction, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Raphael, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello all distinguish themselves with their bandana rather than, creating undifferentiation. I know the original comic had them all in red, but that was a different story than this movie.
Well, that's a very interesting concept, because to us humans, these turtles all look alike, right? So their mask is more to, like, it doesn't even hide more their entire faces, right? It's just there to distinguish them for us humans, right? So that the characteristics are there. Of course, Michelangelo is the goofier one. Raphael is the more hot-headed one,
the angry
one, and he's
which
kind
Ninja
of
Turtle most represents the MAGA culture. I would say probably Michelangelo online, kind of goofy, trying to be funny. And then I would say Raphael represents the leftist liberal, the neoliberal culture. They're just so angry, angry about everything. But anyways,
Donatello. Donatello is like the more intelligent, scholarly one.
Yeah.
And
you shouldn't say that, because they're going to trot his cartoon out to get everybody vaccinated with the new product when they come out this fall. So don't
I don't know.
maybe
They're they're probably already doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
I'm
another
Donatello
point,
here
right?
to tell you about your latest mutagen dose coming to you this fall for the new. They did that with Sesame Street. I think they probably would do it with
Yeah,
him if they
yeah.
could, because he follows the science, they would say. But anyways, contrary to the fall of the science, political science cult, the Ninja Turtle movie does celebrate fathers. It does celebrate distinction. It does celebrate femininity. It does celebrate a reporter who's willing to go and risk her life to tell the truth, which
Oh,
is a
that's completely
Christ-like figure.
opposite to
Yeah.
That's completely opposite to fake
Yeah.
mainstream
Yeah,
media.
where they would do everything they can to not do anything to tell the truth, as long as it gives them a pat on the back from the CIA or whatever their little role models are. Another thing that's interesting about the Ninja Turtles is that they are like mimetic. They're like a mimetic tribe. There's like the tribe of love and togetherness and diversity, differentiation maintained, and then there's this undifferentiation, which is very diverse underneath, by the way, but it's undifferentiated in their action of hate and violence and force and control. And ultimately, one has to win out. And it's interesting to me that the Ninja Turtle figures are a Christ-like archetype in the sense that they're found outside the city. They're in the sewers. They're in the feces.
They're underground.
The urine, the feces. You never smell the Ninja Turtles when you're in there, right? You think it smells like pizza. It doesn't. It smells like vomit and diarrhea.
That's what I've been thinking. Like,
urine,
what would they have? I was just imagining, like, I'm just watching the movie and it's like dark and there's like very damp. But like, I was just imagining what they might have smelled like. Oh my goodness, can you imagine the smell?
Yeah, because even a pet shop with turtles in a pet shop smells horrible. Can you imagine in the sewage system, and especially New York in that time, the voluminous amount of garbage food, hot dog feces, all that going in there, boom, boom, boom. It's going to be filthy. But that is the place of the scapegoat. That's the scapegoat paradise. That's the place, like the catacombs of the early church. That's the place of ill repute in which they have a vantage point on what is the truths of society. And in the new Ninja Turtle movie, I won't spoil it, but basically they literally put somebody who looks like a Trump supporter as the guy who helps the Ninja Turtles at the very end, which is a sign that some folks within the Hollywood left, whether they intend to or not, are desperate to try to maybe get out of the hate matrix that they feel locked into because of social, pressure to stay on the hate train of scapegoating and otherizing people who are poorer than them or whatever, in middle America or whatever it is that they've been told to otherize people as. But yeah, I mean, I think Ninja Turtles is a great illustration of that movie. Is a great illustration of family. It's a great illustration of mimetic escalation on both sides. It's obviously just like any good Christ haunted film, just to finish, there is violence, right? But of course there's no impalings with the swords. It's a children's PG movie. I think it's PG.
Yeah.
And then there's no at the end though, with the villain, Shredder is trying to avenge and murder this Splinter. And Splinter does not kill him, Splinter does not give him a final strike. He tries to heal him. Basically, he catches him, saves his life. So Splinter saves his life to the potential loss of his own. It's a very Christ-like thing you can get out of a 1990s comic book movie. He is willing to risk losing his life to spare the life of his rival. And it's only in the rival's attempt to take advantage of that Christ-haunted action on the part of Splinter that leads to his rival Splinter dying, because he reaches for something and it causes Splinter, or he throws the thing at him and Splinter has to catch it, and that's what makes him, he has to catch his life. So it's not fully, a Christian picture there, but there's no other history, culture, but the story of Jesus that allows that movie to be like that.
Yeah, I was going to say Splinter is probably the most Christ-like figure in that movie, because because they even it's like a funny flashback where it shows like when he was in his pure rat-like form, rat form. He was in the cage watching his master Yoshi. His master Yoshi was doing the karate, training, and he was basically imitating his master. Like even in a rat form, he was like doing all this karate kung fu moves in his cage. And the turtles are basically like the disciples, right? So yeah, I mean, like, a great movie, right? Like, it's one of the most underrated comic book movies. Like, it barely gets mentioned when like we're always hearing about Dark Knight and the Avengers and all that, but way before those movies, like, there was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right?
Yeah, they, they came about at a time when superhero movies were on the wane at the time in terms of box office performance,
Yeah.
and they kind of
Yeah.
put the genre back on the map for a little bit. But
Another thing I wanted to mention, just briefly, this we mentioned that Raphael was hot-headed, and the way Splinter usually handles his hot-headedness is not through coercion or violence, or anything like that, but through reason. Trying to make him cool down and make him understand the deeper truths of his actions, and basically offering him wisdom. And that's like another you know sharp contrast to the Antifa like mentality that we're seeing nowadays, right? Like, uh, uh we think the government and the state, they're always threatening punishment uh towards non-violent crimes, and towards crimes that basically have no victims. And it's like imprisoning people just to have their own opinions and all of that. So it's like very profound of Splinter's way of handling Raphael. Is like, it's just basically like a like a comforting father
yeah, he
father
tells him to channel his anger into constructive
into.
forms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is similar to like the the Yoda figure from Star Wars, trying to
Right.
get your passions under control.
Yeah, also
Yeah, you don't
Mr.
see movies. You
Miyagi.
don't see movies out today, really, and TV shows that celebrate getting your passions under control.
Yeah,
It's more like people
that's
who are
correct, actually.
they're
Yeah.
burnt out. They're burnt out by how much they're enslaved to their passions. They're kind of numb to their passions, but still totally controlled by them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Like, passions, celebrating your passions is the name of the game these days, right? That's probably why these movies, like Karate Kid, they're having a offshoot series based off of that movie. Like the main, not the main character, I would say, like the main guiding mentor character in that movie, like you said, like the Yoda character. uh these are not to be found in the products of today. So that's why we have these nostalgia for the movies of yesterdays, right? Like, we're dying for that kind of thing. And that's why I would say that's one of the big reasons why the new Star Wars movie failed in such a big way. I'm talking about the new trilogy of movies, because if you look closely at the cast of characters in those movies, you sure, you have Jedis, you have the Emperor making the return, the big bad guy, and you have a Darth Vader like antagonist, but you don't really have a mentor like character in there. And the character of Luke Skywalker, who was supposed to be that mentor character because he has aged. He was basically a parody in those movies, right? When he received his own lightsaber, he just threw it away like it meant nothing to him at all. And yeah, that's why I think that the audience knows what they want, and the instinct is like there has to be that father figure, like mentor character in mythology, like the Joseph Campbell kind of mythology that everyone is so familiar with. It has to be, it's like it almost has to be there. If it's not there, then it's completely incomplete. you know
Yeah.
yeah.
There's the passage in Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, where he says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion, it is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Jesus quotes that when he goes before the his trial. He quotes that, and it gets him in trouble. But that's something that I think we need to recapture in our time today, is this idea of what does it mean that Jesus has been given dominion, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. If you listen to a lot of conservative and traditionalist type people, it does sound like that's true. It sounds like languages don't serve him, nations don't serve him, people don't serve him. I don't think it's that way, though. I think he's telling the truth, and I think that that has a consequence for how we should engage politics. I was looking at, looking back at some of the thoughts about, Caesar Augustus being this political figure, the son of God, versus Jesus being the son of God, right? And how there's a tale of two different claims to who's going to be the king of the world. And then when Jesus dies, one of Caesar's employees, the guardian of the crucifixion, the Roman soldier says, truly, this is a God's son, meaning truly, this is my boss. He's the king, not Caesar, who he has pledged his loyalty and worship to in the cult of Rome. And there's something about seeing his nonviolent acceptance of persecution, which opens up for this Roman soldier the revelation that the good news of God's son is one of nonviolent defeat of powers and wicked powers. When you see that in our culture today, you don't see anybody talking like that. When you see conservatives today, they're not talking about truly nonviolent acceptance of one's death. Truly, that is the way of traditional conservatism. No, you see people saying we need a king, we need a Caesar, we need authoritarianism, or we need to entrench back into the ascetic life. At the same time, a lot of folks who want to go into the ascetic life, which is fine in some ways, but they tend to have politics, which is very okay with authoritarian kings cutting people's heads off or looking the wrong way. And I've heard it, so many folks say, oh, right-wing people need to get power and then eliminate the communists out of the country. Well, look, they tried that in the Act of Killing movie that depicts that. People were being accused of being communists, and they ended up killing a lot of innocent people. It didn't work. It backfired down the road. Maybe not at first. But the point is that people who don't understand what the kingdom, when I talk about the politics of, when I use anthropology of the biblical text and interact it with politics and current events, it's not a novel thing. It should be the thing that Christians are thinking about, because the claim of the good news of Jesus, Son of God, is a political statement and in contradiction and challenging to Caesar's claim of being the Son of God. And it's continued to be as such for 2,000 years after. right? But you don't hear that. You don't hear that from traditionalist folks. Traditionalist folks, they want some kind of tough, hardcore hero Caesar figure to come in and bring in Christianity and holiness by force and cut off the heads of the communists and all the degenerates by force and ban all these things by force. It's as if they've never even encountered the gospel. It's as if they've never even, and I don't care. So that's why I have a little skepticism towards some of these traditional institution type idolaters that want to idolize church institutions, but yet you look at the flock fruits and you don't even see any engagement with what the point of the Bible was, especially when you see Jesus's birth narrative and everything in contradiction to Caesar's cult.
Yeah, I mean, when Jesus in the Gospel of John, in I think it's chapter 8, when Jesus talks to the Pharisees about Satan, he says he was a murderer from the beginning, right? And many Christians, including the ones that you have mentioned, do not want to get too deeply into the fact of why Jesus would say Satan was a murderer specifically. Jesus also calls Satan a liar, but the very first thing about Satan Jesus says is that he was a murderer from the start. And I think that's one of the things that escapes a lot of Christians is, oh yeah, it's completely right to try to be a virtuous human being, try to pray to God as many times as possible, and try to get the theology and correct doctrines and whatnot. But it's also, I think it's paramount that Christians should consider the primary theme of the Bible, and that theme is power and violence and coercion and persecution. That those are the
It's
primary.
politics. It's a political text.
Yes, exactly.
And yet,
It's a
what the
political text.
traditionalists do is they say we can have our Christian theocracy by basically learning nothing about what the gospel actually does to critique politics. They learn nothing from it.
Right.
All they
Basically,
do
the
is
gospel.
they say, okay, our piety stuff is going to be over here. And then we're going to be Machiavellians. They literally is what they imitate now, Machiavellians. Whether he's, people have
Yeah.
all kinds of stereotypes, whether he was good or bad, but to imitate Machiavelli as opposed to what the gospel says about politics, to me is an embarrassment. And yet it reveals the fruit of idolizing your team and your church over the actual risen king of the universe who is conquering the world right now and taking control over languages, which is important because languages construct reality. Languages is where we get Ninja Turtles. Languages is where we get semiotics and the signs and all the things that we can look into on different levels. Languages is where we get poetry, art. So when he says he in that passage, when it talks about he's ruling and having dominion, not over of people and nations, but also languages, that's a reference to the world of culture, which is what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And to add to that, there's it's almost like it's very I would say dishonest to say that the Bible does not address and deconstruct monarchy, which was the primary form of governance back in those times.
Yeah.
So when you point out this passage in First Samuel, when Samuel is basically pleading with his fellow Israelites, that when they were basically demanding that they have a king like all the others around us, like all the earthly nations around us, they wanted a king right there and there, right? So Samuel, right there, God through the prophet Samuel offers a very, pinpointing, accurate deconstruction of monarchy, and he says that the king will take a portion of your sheep, he will take a portion of your land, and it goes on and on like that. Basically saying why it's illogical to have a king who takes from you but does not give that much back. So how traditionalist Christians, the trad cats and the ortho and whatever, they would counter that by saying, no, 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 the Israelites wanted they were saying they wanted kings like the other nations. So the Samuel there was saying, no, you should not have the kings like the other nations, but it's okay for you to have a king, like it's a uniquely godly way or whatever. But the deconstruction, let's be honest, the deconstruction of the monarchy does not end right there. It goes on and on through all of the chronicles of, Samuel, sorry, not Samuel, Saul, David, and Solomon, and it goes on and on. And it basically is one giant portfolio, mosaic of all the kings screwing up in one way or another. And by screwing up, it's basically costing thousands of people's lives. It's causing enormous bloodshed, wars, and adultery and whatnot. It's just one mess after another, and it just goes on and on until Israel, the kingdom of Israel, is just taken over by the Babylonians and the Persians. So that's it's just one continuous, like you said, it's a political text. It's just one continuous deconstruction of earthly government as a whole, not just monarchy, but through the illustration of monarchy, earthly government, even the governments, kind of governments that we have today. So it just shows why the kingship of Jesus is the only good form of governance. And the kingship of Jesus does not in any way, if we are taking into consideration uh his self-sacrifice, for the world at the on the cross, if we're taking that into consideration, then we will have there's no way to reconcile the coercive nature of earthly governments, the arm twisting nature of earthly governments with what God has in mind.
Yeah, but see, they use that to then say, well, because we can't reconcile God's kingdom to earthly governments, then we are justified to use messy, nasty coercion because that's just how governments work. They say that. That's what. But so you got to be careful with that line of thought because they say that too. They say that you can't.
No, but
you can't mix. They'll say you can't mix. Even though they'll try to say you can be a Christian godly king, they'll say that the kingdom of heaven is mostly a pietistic kind of personal holiness, and that when it comes to the sword of the state, you must cut off the heads of all the communists before they get you. I mean, that's their mindset. It's unfortunate, but
right. This is very funny because a lot of the saints basically did not do that. But just not just go there. Let's also like again, ultimately Jesus is our standard, and we simply do not see in his earthly life that Jesus is going around cutting heads off of communists or Sanhedrin or Romans back at the time. And the Romans were far more cruel and barbaric than anything that we have nowadays. And Jesus, by that logic, Jesus had every right to, like he says in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he is being arrested and Peter is drawing his sword to strike at Malchus. Jesus in the Gospel of John says, "Do you not know that I have the power, authority over legions of angels?" And basically, what he is saying that he had the authority, but still he chooses not to do that. And prior to that, there was this town that was hostile to Jesus, and the disciples were saying, basically telling Jesus to strike down that city like Sodom and Gomorrah style. But Jesus again does not do that. He says the Son of Man has not come to destroy but to save, right?
Yeah.
So what is Christian again? Like if we are like cutting off these parts from Jesus's earthly life, oh no, that's not for, that's just for that circumstance. And then cutting off this portion, oh no, that's just for that time, that's no longer relevant today. And then what are we left with? we're not left with anything at all except like a Gnostic Jesus, maybe.
And again,
Right?
they say, well, he came as the suffering servant the first time. When he comes back in history, it'll be in the mode of the
Yeah, the book
conquering
of
warrior.
Revelation,
The
basically the
conquering war.
most.
Wait a second, not just Revelation though. They say there's these Old Testament prophecies about the suffering servant, and that's the mode he comes the first time. When he comes back the second time, it's in the vengeful warrior king of, like Yahweh coming in and slaying his enemies in divine wrath. And so therefore, because the suffering servant era happened and we're moving towards the divine warrior, there's almost like this kind of implicit legitimization to say, yeah, you can be a little bit more like a violent warrior too, in preparation for this perfect divine warrior who will set everything right. You know what I mean? With violence.
Yeah, but again, I would like there's two ways to answer that question. The first is, of course, there is justice. We're not saying that there isn't justice. But what is justice according to God? It's a restorative justice, right? It's not justice of like how we humans do it. So he will, like, one of the, I forgot what passage, what book it is from. Maybe you can enlighten me on this. This very famous passage of, he will have mercy on whom he will have mercy, and he will judge on whom he will judge. That's actually in context, that's God making a case for, I will have. And another big example that I just remembered is the book of Jonah, right? So basically, Jonah was right there, he was warning the city of Nineveh to get destroyed in the same way as Sodom and Gomorrah. But God says, I want to have mercy on them. And so your job is to go there and preach my message of mercy and reconciliation and tell them to repent. That is your job. And he was trying to run away from his job, which is very ironic because a lot of Christians do that nowadays, is that they don't want to preach a message of mercy. They don't want to preach a message of compassion. They want judgment. They want, America to be struck down like Sodom and Gomorrah. And they want all of this vengeful wrath of God, all of that stuff. But, in the light of Jesus, Jesus has given us the great commission of make disciples of all nations. That includes your own hometown, by the way. And these traditionalists especially, they don't want to carry out the great commission. They want to carry out the mission of Caesar Augustus, basically the Caesar of Rome. So they're like, you're saying, no, we don't want to bestow mercy, and we don't want to preach repentance. What we want to do is instead, have a Stalin-like figure who will cut off the heads of our enemies and usher us into the utopia. So the book of Jonah is a great repudiation, I would say, of that kind of mentality. And when speaking about the book of Revelation, that again, that the book of Revelation has images like dragons and swords coming out of the mouth of the conqueror, the one who rides on the pale horse and all of that. So it's very it's hard for me to take seriously if you make a case out of that Jesus will come like a conquering warrior from that book, which is clearly utilizing apocalyptic imagery in there, and all of that, just the symbolism to the nth degree. And it's like taking symbolism in its very literal sense. I don't know what else to say. It's like taking the image in its very literal sense. And that's just a very,
I mean, it's just that the coming with the sword out of his mouth is what he says earlier in his ministry. He says, I have come to bring a sword.
right,
Division.
right.
Division
And
is
so
the dissolution of the scapegoat mechanism mediated structures of family loyalty, including extended family, nuclear family, and communal and tribal family, nation family, ideological family. When you try to build family structures based on common scapegoat violence violent actions, it will be destroyed. It will be cut to pieces by the coming of Jesus's dominion in history. That's what Revelation is talking about. the Lion of Judah turns into the slain lamb, which is a satire on what you would expect. A little tiny lamb that's dead showing up on a battlefield doesn't look like somebody who's going to kick your tail in the traditional sense, but it's exactly what it will do when you look at the context of the prophecies that we've been showing. Because if the slain lamb is the image of Jesus and God conquering the world's kingdoms, how are the kingdoms conquered if not because the slain lamb, so weak in its victim stance, cuts to pieces the iron mixed with the clay of our humanness, mixed with the clay of our human brokenness, which is what the slain lamb represents. And how can iron and clay, like in Daniel chapter 2's feet, be crushed and destroyed? It has to be the slain lamb. It has to be the revelation. It has to be the cultures, the languages, the peoples and nations having the dominion of the slain lamb integrate into their sense of who they are, which is what's happening right now. So it's exciting. Let me tell you something. It's not a sign of fear that the powers that be are using more and more creative and desperate ways to sell old-fashioned tyranny in the name of a victim group. That's a sign of victory. It is on the run, and nobody understands. I don't see hardly anybody talking about this in media discourse today, which is a darn shame. But the point is you can't say Caesar is Lord. You can't, when you understand what Jesus's gospel is all about, when you understand that the victimism is a sign of its late stage infection of the gospel, not its triumphant defeat. And that's why you see all these news stories coming out from conservative Christians saying, oh, we're repaganizing. And it's totally missing the point. Yes, as we try to kick against the goads, kick against the pricks of the chariot that Jesus has over us as ox, so to speak, as we kick against it, sometimes we're going to be able to recall old ancient forms of violence and sin and evil. That's true. But that doesn't mean just because we're seeing some of this paganism stuff ooze out that therefore, oh no, Christianity's just been wiped the floor with and now it's going back as if nothing ever happened. No, come on. That's so dumb. The slain lamb tells you that in the attempt to murder and destroy Christ and his body and his consciousness and Christ's consciousness as it relates to the victim in all societies, that is precisely how the slain lamb will defeat such societies that try to impose violent expulsion of the lamb. You are defeated by the stone the builders rejected being expelled. That's what defeats you. And nobody gets it yet. That's why we're putting these programs together, so one day people will understand what the heck is happening.
Well, I mean, like, I think a good example of understanding how how the slain lamb can be victorious is try to look at Disney movies, right? So there's a very particular symmetry associated with how Disney portrays its sympathetic characters, let's say. Yeah. They often portray them, with like round eyes, like very innocent looking, the sense. So that's one of the reasons why, a good example is Bambi, right? That deer movie, remember that? Yeah. So like, deer, so very, I think Disney borrows a lot from Christian aesthetics in that manner. And even the movie that we talked about, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? Like Splinter and all of those characters, they have a very particular look to them. Even though they're rats and turtles, but they are it's almost like they're made very human. So that's like how slain lamb, like it's almost like as you're trying to slaughter the lamb, you are made to look in its eyes, and its eyes are like giving away like these very, why are you doing this kind of look to you. So that's like one of the ways why a slain lamb can be victorious and in an aesthetical sense, right? So and the culture of our time borrows that aesthetic, and that's why we have all of these animal rights activism, and it's considered animal cruelty. And where does animal rights activism come from, right? Did not exist in pagan societies, ancient pagan societies. It exists in very specific cultures, mainly the cultures where the gospel has been saturated into, right? These cultures uh, have a tendency to be defensive of anything that's considered marginalized or unjustly treated. That's why you have these groups like BLM and like any other group, like any LGBTQ group or whatever. That's why there's specific activism related to these groups, and that's because at one time in American history and the history of the West, the black people and racial minorities were treated unfairly or whatnot, and that's haunting the modern culture. And the same goes with animal activism, right? Why are there vegans? These people, like, why are these people wanting to not eat animal meat? Is because the slaughtering of cows and bulls and chickens, those images haunt them. And why would those images haunt them? For no specific reason. Those like, if you go to countries like China and some northeast regions of India, you will see like markets where dogs are slaughtered and played out. They don't have those kind of sentimentality attached with dogs like we have, right? So so again, like this victimist quote unquote mentality exists in very specific cultures. And there's a reason why it exists in very specific cultures. And it does not mean, like many people often suggest, that Christianity kind of subverts what is pure. No, it means that Christianity does makes it impossible for you to live in under a reign of violence and tyranny. And Christianity makes it obvious that the way the earth how the earthly governments operate is always through the arm twisting, coercion, threatening to lock you up if you don't dress in a certain way, or if you don't speak in a certain way. And Christianity makes the case for the marginalized, and that is how it spreads in the West.
Yeah, the a lot of people keep showing these beautiful cities in Dubai and Singapore and Shanghai and Japan
Right.
about look how beautiful and clean their cities are compared to things falling apart in American cities. And there's
But
there's a
then
lot
you
of lessons
have
you can learn from there, but they're ultimately emulating an aesthetic that the West patterned a long time ago. And
Well,
we
it's
get,
not just that, bro, because let me point out what a lot of people have already pointed out. There's a big issue in countries like Dubai where they use migrants basically like slaves to construct those skyscrapers. The same goes on in India. The same goes on in China, and a lot of people will get upset you know uh, because I put India in that list. Uh, Consider, like, if you compare the construction workers in India to the construction workers in the US and the West, in the US and the West, safety of the constructors is the primary focus of the construction company, right? You don't want to have the families of of an injured constructor suing you into oblivion and then paying millions of dollars as all of that. In India, and in China, these constructors, they work with no protection at all. They work with zero protection. They work on bamboos, like they make these bamboo stands, and without ropes or anything, as these guys hang on to them without any protective gear or anything at all. Multi-storied skyscrapers, and they are basically risking their lives. They could be dead, and when they are dead, nothing happens to the construction companies. That's just the reality. And like, people might point out all sorts of things, like if you can point out the pyramids of Giza or the Taj Mahal, but what stays hidden behind those things, behind those, quote unquote wonders of the world? The millions of slaves that died building them throughout decades. That's one of the reasons, why it sounds very stupid when people bring up those things. And of course, you rightfully pointed out, they are building Western architecture on top of that. So that's another thing.
When generation encounters gospel slain lamb and haunting their conscience, their natural knee-jerk reaction is to react to their parents and grandparents' recent hypocrisies or injustices. They don't go back to Egypt. You see what I mean? So when the 1960s hippie is reacting to the injustices of their parents and their grandparents who were born around the turn of the century, they're reacting to their conscience being pricked by the slain lamb through media technology, extending human consciousness to be more aware of what we're doing. It doesn't go back to the slaves and victims inside the pyramids. And that's important.
Right.
Because it doesn't have to be that way, but it tends to be that way. It doesn't. I think a true Christian, true conversion fully, uncovers the scapegoat mechanism tendency of all humans and all cultures around the world, and then uses that as a standing point to reject all of it and to go towards creativity. But that's something that, a lot of folks who are not raised in that way, maybe they didn't get the full gospel story told to them as they should have or modeled for them. They tend to say, well, look, I'm mad at the way people did things in the 1950s, or I'm mad at the way people did things in 1860s. But they don't think about 6000 BC. And if you ask them, they'll laugh. I mean, they literally will laugh at you and say, are you kidding me? You're doing whataboutism. You're talking about things thousands of years ago that don't have any, direct effect right now. And it's like, yeah, it does. That's why you're still, uncovering recent scapegoating hypocrisies in recent generations. But that delayed effect is what we're working against. What we're trying to do on this program and other programs is extend that victim consciousness to the very primordial beginnings of mankind, so that we cannot situate ourselves in a way in which we can create an ideology to justify continuing it, right? We have to be able to look at it. And it's a hard thing, because there are folks in Girard students who studied this stuff and understand that the victimage mechanism is involved in all cultures, and yet still want to call Trump supporters demons, deplorables, monsters, and everything. And you're like, how in the hell do you get so far truth, but yet so far stupid? But that's because ultimately it's not just an intellectual exercise. It's an emotional thing, and people want to have somebody that they can feel better than. They want to have somebody they can feel better than. And a lot of those progressive evangelicals who uncover Girardianism, they like feeling better than so-called fundamentalists. Hey, we've been picking on traditionalists too, but we also protect them too. So,
yeah, it's very funny, because a lot of the people who are fighting against white privilege tends to start history with the white people. You get what I'm saying? Because it's inconceivable for them to imagine a history without white people. And that's very funny, because you never hear them talk about the mass human sacrifices in South America.
Or the Persian privilege, the Persian Empire privilege, right?
Persian Empire privilege, South American Aztec Inca privilege, or Pharaoh Empire privilege,
Mongol privilege.
That's another very funny thing about the pharaohs. a lot of these people say the pharaohs were actually, sub-Saharan African. So what? So do these people know that the pharaohs use slaves, right, in building their pyramids? So why would they want to, catch on to that privilege? So, anyways, like these Hotep people and all of those guys, uh,
That's
deluded
the new
people.
thing.
So
Yeah, it's like they don't want to
yeah,
admit they
we
don't
we
want.
was kings and all of that nonsense garbage. And another thing, they won't ever talk about the Han dynasty, the Hong dynasty privilege, or samurai privilege, or they will never talk about it. It's like white people are like the center of the universe. White people are the center of the universe. The white man is the sun, and all the other races are
Yeah,
rotating
that's why
around
we
the
say the
sun.
woke culture is the worship of the white person, right? Especially the
Yeah,
white man as God.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a problem. Because we don't deify our we don't what does Jesus talk about, that God desires mercy, not sacrifice, but as Rene Girard points out, we don't invent our gods, we deify our victims. So there's this kind of weird relationship between the need to scapegoat white people for the problems of everything, but in the way they do it, it ends up deifying them functionally as this construct, this big other, like you say, this big other that invents slavery and invents mistreatment of women or something. I mean, it's so dumb, the things they're saying. But again, that's a sign that Satan's mechanism is on the run, because he creates scandal and then he has to hide under a victim narrative to justify using violence to deal with the scandal. Now, the other problem of human desire is a little bit less positive, right? In the sense that because the scapegoat mechanism is broken, the hyper competitive nature of human rivalry is out of control and unleashed. So that is a little bit more of a challenge, right? Because to challenge the God of the self is ultimately harder than to challenge the God of the Satan, which is the scapegoat mechanism, the false sacred. But we have to take our victories where we're getting them, and we're really, I think, a little bit further along in eroding the legitimacy of scapegoat mechanism as a collective binding agent. But we're a little further behind on getting the human self deconstructed, although it's happening, right? Because that's one thing we have to see, intersectionality and postmodernity. You can criticize the woke stuff, but what they've done is they have found a way, right, to mainstream deconstruction of the self. They're not doing it the right way, right? But they're starting the conversation about, what is myself made up of, and what is my gender made up of, and all these things obviously can be geared into directions which are destructive. But what man intends for evil, God redeems, right? God takes. And so you have to understand what wokeism is doing is, in some sense, catechizing the masses to have a kind of disposition that will be set up to be ready to deconstruct the self in a Christian sense. You see what I mean? Isn't that wonderful? I'm telling you guys, I'm not saying to be triumphalist and everything's going to be easy. It's not. And everything is open, but it looks really positive trends here with Jesus's kingdom and dominion. That's what I'm trying to get at. Do you see that, what I'm talking about? I know that's tough because a lot of people take wokeism and say, no, it's dangerous. And not just wokeism, but globalism in general and all this stuff. Oh my goodness, it's tyrannical, it's violent, it's dangerous, it's terrible, it's winning, it's defeating everything. And I'm like, no, actually, God's going to let and it includes their surveillance state. God's going to let them build up all their stuff, and the victimism is going to fall on its own way, and everything that is built up will be used to baptize the world. People will continue to want to imitate the West in its globalism, and as they imitate, we're all going to become more and more undifferentiated, and at that undifferentiated spot is when the gospel will penetrate even more effectively to India, Northeast area, and China, and all the places you mentioned that still let people climb on bamboo 50 stories up. Yeah,
I mean, we have to, when we talk about wokeism, we have to keep in mind that wokeism considers itself a progressive movement, right? It doesn't consider itself it's always like going towards something. So the flavor of the day seems to be racial minorities, sexual minorities, and all of that. But slowly and slowly, it progresses, sometimes in bad ways, sometimes in surprisingly good ways. So one bad way that it progresses is its predatory nature, increasingly predatory nature towards children, right? That's something that it has to contend with. And another thing, another pretty good thing that we can say about wokeism in the is this weird way that it comes towards, like, it is basically uh, destroying the sexual revolution in a very weird fashion. And what I mean by that is, whereas in the onset of at the onset of the sexual revolution, you have all of these guys and girls, wildly exchanging partners, not getting married, or even if after getting married they would like just be liberated, consider themselves liberated from all the
Yeah.
traditional sexual norms, right? Like they wanted a society that would that would make it completely normal for them to just sleep with just about anyone at all. But after the Me Too movement and all of that, people will think 10 times before
I
having
mean,
a one night stand.
even Vince McMahon's character, I saw clips of his on Twitter, and they were saying, because they just merged their companies, so his videos are going viral again.
Yeah,
And they said this would never pass, things that he was saying to his daughter
right,
as a
they would never
character.
do that.
And they said
Right.
they would never allow that on television today. And I looked at that and I thought, well, some of the comments said, well, it's because we're so weak. But at the end of the day, what we're retrieving, we can reintegrate. You know what I'm saying? We can retrieve something about concern for respect and decency and still not, continually go to a point where there is no good humor or villains or whatever into the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good thing that think about it. Think about it for a second. The fact that, again, the reactionary mode is to say everything is bad, getting worse because it's going to the future, right? But Christians say the future is better than the past. The Christians say that the future is better than the past, right? The left says, they tend to say in history, the future is better than the past, but they're becoming more reactionary because they become so wedded to empire brazenly and the CIA and all these stupid things that now they're just looking more and more reactionary. But that's a great opportunity for Christians, right? Because when you have two types of reactionary groups, the dominant hegemon, which we call neoliberalism, and then the fake opposition party, which is the conservatives, which are just reactionaries to the reactionaries, that opens up for Christians to finally be the progressives in the room and to really chart a vision forward. But, when I look back at some of that stuff that Vince McMahon was saying to his daughter, and I think to myself, how come society didn't think that was a big deal to say that stuff back then on a programming at 8:00 at night for kids that could still walk by and watch that? But yet now, they wouldn't dare to put that content on in that same company, in that same person, the same players. Is that necessarily all a negative? I don't know. Just like you said, I mean, this idea that,
Right.
everything, again, these things are not to be doom thinking. Like even look at the boogeyman right now that they've tried to, with the culture war, the drag queen, right? What is the drag queen really about besides looking at, the doing the whole, the reading books to the kids, right? If you want to steel man what they're doing, what they're saying is that the drag queen character, I'm talking about the left now, the left's perspective on this is the drag queen character is a satire on over sexualized, makeup culture, glamour culture, it's satirizing it, because it's like the joke in my, from what I'm just vaguely looking at what they're saying, from the way they're displaying it. The joke is that these often, overweight older guys and stuff who would be considered to be the farthest from Cindy Crawford or Marilyn Monroe from past periods of time, can don makeup in a kind of cartoonish satire of that which they're not, right? In a kind of garish, kind of scary, almost unmasking. They put their paint, they make their faces look, they're almost looks like a kabuki theater painting, right, of their face, like those kabuki gods in the Japanese kabuki. You look at some of the painting on these big men's faces, and it's almost like they're doing like a kabuki theater kind of like performance art satire of the hierarchy of sexual power dynamics mediated through consumerist culture, makeup culture, glamour culture, Hollywood culture. So in some sense, there's a healthy plate. Not that is a thing that Christians should support, but I understand the what's going on there, right? It's a reaction. It's a reaction to other problems. And it's a reaction from below, right? It's a reaction from scapegoats, in the sense of older, heavy-set men are not necessarily on the highest pecking order for glamour and desire, and yet they can don this kind of like Halloween cartoonish mocking of glamour Hollywoodization culture, and it's a kind of like mockery of the whole pyramid structure, right? So it's an inversion of beauty. You can say it's an inversion of beauty, but it's also an inversion to bastardizations of beauty, right? That are not beautiful, right? Tons of makeup on, and Hollywood culture, lights, glamour, action, and all that worship of the crowd stuff is really in itself hollow and shallow, And so the drag queen culture becoming normalized and brought into the mainstream is the mainstream processing intellectual critiques about modern mass culture that were made 60 years ago, 70 years ago in academia. Now they're becoming mainstream, consciously processed. Does that make sense? That's part of what I see with that drag queen stuff. But then you get into the kid thing, and I think what they're trying, this is again, me trying to steel man something that I don't agree with. But I think what they're trying to do, what they're saying they're doing, is we're trying to introduce children to a new culture in which the Hollywood glamorized culture of tons of makeup and vanity and all that can be kind of mocked and poked fun at, so that if you're goofy looking or you're not the best, that you can kind of, you can celebrate, your imperfections without being excluded, right? That you can, whatever. I think that's what they're trying to do by putting drag queen people from their perspective, right? That's what they're trying to do from their perspective, is to introduce a kind of satire on makeup, hierarchical glamour culture, which isn't necessarily anything to do with Christian beauty, is it? You see what I'm saying? And so again, all of that's coming with this magnet of the slain lamb pulling that towards somewhere else. And that doesn't mean you should celebrate drag queen story time. It doesn't mean you should do any of that. It's just understanding this is a transitionary fossil going somewhere else. It's evolving into something else.
Yeah, culturally. I think it's basically when Jesus said, "Do not be afraid," I think we should take those words to heart. This is something that Jesus says repeatedly, right? Do not be afraid. But what we tend to do, those of us who are trying to follow Christ, is what we tend to do is, oh no, this is the boogeyman that we should be afraid of. So we point towards transgenders or homosexuals or Russians or whatever, like this is the ultimate boogeyman, or this is the thing that that we should battle against, right? Like fight against. But Jesus said, do not be afraid. And the reason why he said that is because he has effectively captured time and space. He has captured history, on the cross, and has given his victorious seal of approval with the resurrection. So the drag queen thing that you mentioned, yes, it is a very disgusting thing when it occurs around children and all of that. But at the same time, it is having, and I'm speaking primarily as an on an observational basis here. It has this side effect of making fun of, like you say, like this consumeristic beauty culture that exists, where people are getting surgeries, to the point of wherein nothing in your face or in your body is natural at all. Everything's just surgeries upon surgeries.
And the garish, scary makeup is meant to kind of satirize the undercurrent darkness underneath the good makeup of the yesteryear, right? And in today's year. And there's nothing Christian about pouring on tons and tons of makeup in the traditional sense necessarily. So why do we fight it when some big guy is making fun of it? It doesn't mean that we endorse it at all. That's not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is we're observing this as a dispassionate anthropological analysis of our culture in real time. That's what I'm trying to do.
Exactly.
What you're trying to do. And so the point is that we're watching humans work out the continual revelation of the slain lamb since the foundation of the world. And that's going to look with all kinds of messiness. And it's going to have all these kind of transitionary fossils. Now the even more controversial in some sense is the normalization of gender deconstruction for children, right? And transgenderism. You look at a lot of what you see on that online world where they're trying to deconstruct your gender identity. And again, from an anthropological perspective, it's a culture haunted by awareness of hierarchies, and a way in which there's a wrestling of like, well, who gets to say what's what? Doesn't mean what they're doing is right. You shouldn't be doing anything to do with dangerous, cancerous, destructive hormone therapy and playing games with gender identity. But when you look at these people again, a lot of these people who are trying to say I'm a Zim or a Jim or I'm non-binary, if you look at them, they look like people who are disaffected. They look like people who are typically nerds or marginalized folks, not the prettiest, not the most handsome, you know what I mean? And their own genders. They're the marginalized folks. And so it's natural that marginalized people, when a hegemonic culture discourse, which is using their pain for maybe cynical political purposes, comes along and says, hey, you can claim a new gender, non-binary, a gender, or whatever, that gives them some sense of dignity in their own mind to say, well, you know what, I don't always just have to be the ugly girl or the awkward guy or whatever. I can come into some 70th gender that's just uniquely my expression. And that will allow me to maintain a sense of self. Now, what is that? That's what we call that's classic undifferentiation in mimetic rivalry. In mimetic rivalry, you are looking for ways to justify your differentiation, to distinguish yourself from your rival, the more and more you become alike. And the more and more the genders become alike, so to speak, in terms of economic parity, right? Political parity, all these different things. They're making movies where they're trying to push that, a 5-foot girl can beat up 6'5" guys. And then like that kind of insanity is going to push the gender undifferentiation to the point where it's going to pop out and you're going to get all of these weird 70th gender to say, well, I'm uniquely me still, right? Because when Princess Peach is saving Mario, and Mario is saving Princess Peach on the video game, but in the movie, Princess Peach is saving Mario. When everything's crazy, you'll say, well, this is too much. I want to find something that's uniquely me. And so if there's infinite genders, then I can infinitely pick something that's uniquely me as a cat or a dog or whatever. And therefore, I can maintain my sense of self. Again, it's a classic sign of undifferentiation. And the way you solve that is to alleviate, in my opinion, the violence undergirding so much of this, get the violence out of the way, And then you can discover healthy forms of differentiation that will naturally crop up in the environment when there's less violence and built into the game. Does that make sense? A lot of these people, who want to change their gender will just realize I'm a tomboy. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm getting at. And they will realize that once we stop having this kind of facade culture.
Yeah, it's almost like the thing you mentioned about the 5-foot girl beating up 6-foot guys in these modern movies. It's almost like these modern movies are making it very obvious how ridiculous the position of egalitarianism is. Like they're visualizing the stupidity of egalitarianism, and they're in that sense they are doing the Christians' job for the Christians. So you get what I'm saying?
But it's all Christ. Christ owns it all. So even in the errors, he's still owning how the error manifests. Right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right. It's basically like how these errors manifest, and by realizing it, like I said, this woke ideology is a progressive ideology. It's not a ideology set in stone like Marxism or anything like that. It's constantly evolving. So right now there's this flavor of the day, and like tomorrow we may be concerned about something else. And in somewhere in that progression, I find it very difficult to see how they will not realize, like this undifferentiation, when they realize how this undifferentiation is causing all the chaos and everything. And they will realize at one point or another, maybe we should stick to some sort of differentiation, which by the way they are doing right now. They are still sticking to differentiation. They are still setting themselves apart from like the gays, or something apart from the racial minorities. If someone comes along and says, if a gay person or a sexual or minority person comes to a racial minority person and says, like, we're both on the same team, chances are there will be one person or the other person will find disagreements and will say, no, we're not quite on the same team yet. And they will never be on the same team, because differentiation will always exist. And they will come to that day.
Because it's kind of subjective. You could say that the racial minority can say, well, until you get rid of your institutional white supremacy that you benefit from.
Right.
And then the person can say, well, until you get rid of your heteronormativity that you benefit from. You know what I mean? Back at that person who's a minority racially. You can just go infinitely there. In terms of trying to see who's got the most alienated victim points to be supreme, right? And ultimately, that stuff ends up getting collectivized into this kind of violence that you see politically, where you want to pass laws to revoke speech and property and theft and kill Russians as a scapegoat. It's just this type of rivalry gets bottled up and channeled into scapegoats, but it's not going to work. And sir, like you were saying, the slain lamb works if all the mainstream media outlets are saying the same narrative. Eventually that leftist spirit, which is always looking for the dissonant underground, it's going to notice, wait a second. See, it's interesting. The Hillary Clinton neo-lib is really an older person. It's a little bit older, really. A lot of the dissident, radical leftist stuff is going to be a younger thing. And like, you can only think it's cool to hate Trump so long before, once every TV outlet has been saying hate Trump for like 20 years straight, your natural inclination as a youthful person is going to be to rebel against it, to find the underground voice or the slain lamb voice, right? The stone, the bitter rejected voice. You're going to look for that because it's just natural.
They have a, like, if you've noticed the J.K. Rowling saga, they've these I don't know what they call themselves. I'm just losing track of all the different groups, but they've found a new term for feminists.
Yeah, it's called TERFs.
TERF, exactly. Yeah. trans exclusionary radical feminist or something like that. So that's like that's a good example of what you're talking about, right? The youthful impulse to rebel against the classical liberal types who were from the baby boomer generation. And as this goes on and on and on, it's hard. Like it almost seems to me like what Solomon concluded in the book of Ecclesiastes is that everything is meaningless, fear God, and like that kind of thing. It's like do you think the same thing? Because I think
No, it's
the current,
meaningful when you understand Jesus's
yes,
defeat of the powers and how they bound up societies. It's completely meaningful. If without God, it's meaningless. Without
yes. So
God,
that's
it's just
the
endless crabs in the bucket trying to pull the other crab down, and they're
endless
all going to
schisms,
boil to death.
endless, yeah. It's endless schisms, endless like this. Okay, we're progressing towards that. Oh no, this is not working out. Okay, let's progress towards that. Oh no, this is not working out. Oh my goodness, like, is there any way to progress at all? But there is no way to progress except through Christ Jesus, and that's the way that Christ Jesus progresses society, is to get rid of violence, get rid of, completely embrace a non-violent way of life, which is persuasion, persuading voluntary self-sacrifice, persuading your neighbor to and cooperating with your neighbor to build a prosperous society without the need of coercion, without the need of threatening your neighbor with an agent of the law, calling the state, on your
Well, that's what
snitching on your
that's
neighbor to
just
the
a
state.
pushback. That's what the anarcho-communist says about property rights. Is they say, well, as long as you have private property, you have the threat of coercion keeping that together. You can't defend property without threatening violence. And I would just say that the Christian answer to that is to say, well, we're going to have to defend people from having their homes being stolen from, because that would be defending victims. So there is a little bit of force there, but that ultimately the direction we're going is that everybody should be able to own a home through technological advancements, so that you won't even need to steal the other person's home. That you can have a glorious
Yeah,
mansion without being extremely expensive to build for your own home and your own family, and that you can have food that's healthy and nutritious, that doesn't cause mental health disorders. When they did the study and they had omega-6 foods, which is highly involved in the prison food system, when they reduced the omega-6 consumption, the violence reduced dramatically within prisoners. If that doesn't give you a window into what we're dealing with, when you feed people good, nutritionally rich foods, they're not going to have as much mental health disorders. They're not going to be so underdeveloped in their reptilian brain, and their prefrontal cortex being damaged and so forth. They're going to have the ability to use reason and cooler heads to prevail. And they'll also have technology with Christians that will allow them to afford a nice home without having to steal somebody else's. So the answer to the communist theft of your house, which requires you to have defensive force to protect it, is not just to stay at defensive force to protect it. It's to create housing so cheap anybody can have one with just a little bit of hard work. That's not much at all.
right. Yeah. It's very interesting how at the start of this discussion, we were talking about how the controlling of passions is out of out of vogue in our time, but at the same time, we've talked about this transgenderism, undifferentiation, and all of that, and it's just coming back again. Like, it's almost as if society is unconsciously moving towards to a point where we have to differentiate, we have to establish differentiation, and we acknowledge differentiation. Unlike the anarcho-communists that you talked about, the key here is again differentiation, right? We and part of that differentiation, keeping that differentiation intact, is to control the passions, right? And what is the passions if not chaotic violence, your urge to inflict
Or
chaotic violence on others,
jealousy,
or
preoccupation with
envy,
beating your neighbor.
exactly
Worship,
the
ultimately, it's
precursor.
worship. It's ultimately worship of your neighbor. That's what
Yes,
the
yes.
passions are.
So
It's worshiping what other people you imagine them to have a better situation than you, and therefore
yes,
you
and
think
when we're
you're cheated from life
differentiation,
if you have to tear them down or see them suffer for you to be happy.
yes, and in this differentiation where we acknowledge uh, unity, but not at the expense of diversity, where we acknowledge that different people are different, but we still, yeah, are aspiring to get along with different people. Part of being part of the cathar the uh the feeling of, the heavenly feeling of unity. What makes the heavenly feeling of unity great is that there are different people among each of us, not that all of us think the same, and all of us think look the same, like foot clans, but being different. And I think that, acknowledging that we're different, not worshiping the desire of your neighbor, as you rightly said, pointed out, is a good path that we can consider, and is ultimately going to lead us, God willing, to a post-scarcity society that was wonderfully illustrated with the story of Jesus feeding the multitudes with the loaves and the fish. With so that's a post-scarcity society right there, and then Jesus is showing us how the future is going to look like right there, right? Like he's showing us how, if we embrace technology, and if we embrace the right
And
nutrition, like you said,
yeah, not just
we are
embrace
not going.
technology, embrace technologies and techniques that are Christ filled methods of loving and
Right.
serving our neighbor non-violently, right? A lot of
Yes.
folks believe, there's a lot of technologies that are dumb and horribly made and horribly
Yeah,
designed.
not the social media app kind of technology, but the real
Well, even
physical
that will
atoms.
even that will be redeemed. Right now, we're doing. Most people are going to learn about this through social media. Without it, we wouldn't have a platform, probably, right?
So you're saying we're going to have memes in the kingdom of God?
Yeah, there'll be something. Where we're going, we won't need memes. I appreciate your time, Surit. Thank you for joining me. And again, you can go to aneighborschoice.com to see Surit's articles that he's writing and publishing on our site. And you can also email us hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.